It was a calm September evening in 2023 when Flight 247 from Los Angeles to New York took off. The first-class cabin was bustling with celebrities, high-profile passengers, and important figures. Among them was Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his humility and kindness. People around him whispered excitedly as he quietly read a worn-out book. No one could have anticipated what would unfold just an hour into the flight. As the plane reached cruising altitude, a sudden commotion erupted near seat 2A, where Keanu sat. A young flight attendant named Jessica stormed down the aisle, her face flushed with emotion, and without warning she slapped the book out of Keanu's hands. "How could you?" she cried, her voice trembling with anger. Gasps echoed through the cabin as passengers turned their heads in shock. Keanu, stunned but composed, looked up at her with a mix of confusion and concern. Jessica, 29 years old, had been working as a flight attendant for 7 years and was known among her colleagues for her professionalism. But this outburst was entirely out of character, and the passengers were too stunned to say anything. Whispers filled the cabin as people speculated about what could have caused such a dramatic confrontation. Keanu, still calm, finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said softly, barely audible over the hum of the plane engines. "Do I know you?" Jessica's hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and before she could stop herself, her words spilled out. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said, her voice cracking. "You saved my life 15 years ago, but you also ruined it." The entire cabin gasped again. What could she possibly mean? Keanu's brow furrowed as he searched her face, trying to recall. The statement hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Jessica continued, her voice growing stronger despite the quivering in her voice. "I was a teenager, 14 years old, living in Ohio. My family was falling apart, and one night I ran away from home. I was lost, alone, and terrified. When you found me on that dark road, you stopped your motorcycle and helped me get to safety. You gave me hope that night, Keanu. But you also made a promise. One you didn't keep." Her words hit Keanu like a thunderclap. His eyes widened as the memory started dawning on him. The passengers leaned in, riveted, as the emotional exchange continued. What promise had he made? Why was Jessica so angry? Jessica continued, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You told me everything would be okay. You said I wasn't alone anymore. You promised me you'd come back the next day to check on me. But you never did." Her voice broke and tears began streaming down her face. Keanu's eyes widened further, the memory finally surfacing. The passengers were silent, hanging on every word. Jessica took a shaky breath, clearly reliving the pain of that night. "You told me everything would be okay. You said I wasn't alone anymore. You promised me you'd come back the next day to check on me. But you never did." Her voice broke and tears began streaming down her face. Keanu's eyes widened further, the memory finally surfacing. The passengers were silent, hanging on every word. Jessica took a shaky breath, clearly reliving the pain of that night. Keanu's face softened as the memory hit him like a wave. He whispered almost to himself, "Ohio? The runaway?" His voice cracked slightly, and he looked into Jessica's tear-filled eyes. "I remember now." The cabin was silent, hanging on his words. Jessica took a deep breath, clearly shaken but gaining strength. "You were my hero that night, Keanu. For the first time in my life I felt like someone saw me, like I mattered. But then you disappeared. I waited for you, hoping every day you'd come back. I needed you, Keanu. I needed someone to believe in, someone to keep me going. But you vanished." Keanu's expression shifted from confusion to heartbreak. He looked down, his hands clenching into fists. "Jessica, I'm so sorry. I never meant to break that promise." His voice filled with regret. For the first time, his famously stoic demeanor faltered. "I thought you were safe with the family we called that night. I didn't know." Jessica's shoulders shook as she fought back sobs. "That family gave me a place to stay for a few days. But after that, I was back on the streets. I waited for you, hoping every day you'd come back. I needed you, Keanu. I needed someone to believe in, someone to keep me going. But you vanished." Keanu's heart sank at her words. He leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. His face was etched with guilt. "I didn't forget about you, Jessica. I swear. I wanted to check on you, but the next day I got a call. My best friend had died suddenly. I was lost in my own grief, and I didn't handle things the way I should have. I should have gone back for you. I should have done more." Jessica's anger seemed to waver, replaced by a deep sadness. "Do you know what it's like to lose faith in people? To feel like no one cares?" "I should have gone back," Keanu said softly. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." For a moment, the entire cabin was silent, the tension so thick it felt like everyone was holding their breath. A middle-aged woman in the row behind them quietly dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. A young man across the aisle clenched his jaw, visibly moved. Jessica's voice trembled as she said, "I don't know why I lashed out tonight. Maybe I just needed you to know how much that night changed me, how much I needed you back then." Keanu reached out slowly, unsure, but gently took her hand in his. "Maybe this is my chance to make things right. I don't know if I can undo the pain I caused, but I want to try, if you'll let me." Jessica hesitated. The walls she had built over the years were trembling under the weight of his sincerity. The cabin crew finally stepped in, suggesting they move to the galley for privacy. But the passengers didn't want to miss a moment of what felt like something truly special. They exchanged quiet looks, some even wiping away tears. As they moved to the galley, the voices became muffled, leaving the passengers to speculate, wonder, and reflect on their own lives. Whatever happened next between Keanu and Jessica, it was clear this story wasn't over. It was just the beginning. In the galley, away from curious eyes, Jessica broke down completely. Her sobs filled the small, cramped space. Keanu stood helplessly, unsure how to comfort her. Finally, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Jessica, I know saying sorry isn't enough," he said softly, "but you have to believe me. If I had known what you went through, I would have done anything to be there for you." Jessica wiped her eyes, her breath shaky. "You were my hero that night. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone saw me, like I mattered. But then you disappeared. And I started to think maybe I didn't matter after all." Keanu's heart broke at her words. He leaned against the counter, running a hand through his hair. His face was etched with guilt. "You do matter. You still do. And I know I failed you, but I want to make it right. Please, Jessica, let me try." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You can't undo the years I spent feeling lost. You can't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep, wishing someone, anyone, cared." Keanu stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're right. I can't change the past. But maybe we can change the future. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. I'm here now. For the first time, Jessica, you're not alone." Jessica's breath hitched as his words sank in. A part of her wanted to push him away to protect herself from more disappointment. But another part, the part that still believed, wanted to believe him. "How?" she whispered. "How can you possibly make it right?" Keanu hesitated and then made a quiet promise that would change everything. "Come to Los Angeles. Let me help you rebuild what was lost. Whatever you need, support, resources, someone to talk to, I'll be there. You're not alone anymore, Jessica. Not this time." Her breath caught at his words. Part of her wanted to reject him, to protect herself from further heartbreak. But another part, the part that still hoped, wanted to trust him. As the plane began its descent into New York, Jessica looked out the window, her thoughts swirling with emotions. For the first time in years, she felt a sliver of hope. This story wasn't over, not for her, not for Keanu, and not for the lives that had just collided in the most unexpected way. When the wheels touched down in New York, both Jessica and Keanu knew this journey was only just beginning. The plane had just stopped at the gate and the passengers began to grab their things. But for Jessica and Keanu, everything seemed to stop. Memories that had felt so far away were suddenly right in front of them, brought to life by the man who had once shown kindness to millions, yet unknowingly had left her with a wound that never healed. Keanu turned to Jessica as the seatbelt sign went off. "Jessica, I know this isn't easy for you," he said gently, his voice calm but firm. "But I want you to know, I'm not going to disappear again." Jessica looked at him, her face filled with doubt. "I don't know if I can believe that," she whispered. "I don't know if I can trust that again." Keanu nodded, understanding her pain. "You don't have to believe me today or even tomorrow. But I'll prove it, whatever it takes." As passengers began to leave the plane, many glanced at them curiously. A flight attendant named Emma, who had been watching quietly, stepped closer. She gently touched Jessica's arm. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her eyes flicking between Jessica and Keanu with concern. Jessica managed a small smile. "I'm figuring it out," she said weakly. Emma nodded and stepped back, giving them space. Jessica sighed and turned to Keanu. "You're right. I don't have to decide today. But I'm not the same girl you met all those years ago. I built walls to protect myself and I don't know if I can just let them down." Keanu's face softened. There was sadness in his eyes. "I wouldn't expect you to. But maybe we can start small, like a conversation or just having coffee. No pressure." no expectations. As they walked off the plane together, Jessica's co-workers watched with curiosity, some whispering, others smiling knowingly as though sensing something important was happening. Outside the terminal, Keanu stopped and turned to Jessica. "Where are you staying tonight?" he asked, his voice steady. Jessica hesitated. "There's a crew hotel nearby." Keanu's gaze was gentle. "Good. I want to make sure you're okay. Can I walk you there? Just to talk." No pressure, no expectations. Jessica stared at him, her walls still up. But something in her heart ached. A small spark she hadn't felt in a long time. Finally she nodded. "Okay, just to talk." As they walked into the cool New York evening, their conversation drifted between the past and present. Jessica began to open up about her struggles, her triumphs, and everything that had led her to this moment. Keanu listened closely, his eyes full of guilt but admiration for the woman she had become. "You're stronger than you know," he said softly. "To go through all of that and still stand here today. I'm in awe of you." Jessica laughed bitterly. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken most days." Keanu stopped walking and looked at her with intensity. Broken pieces can still make something beautiful. Maybe even stronger than before. You just have to believe that. Tears filled Jessica's eyes, but this time they weren't just from pain. Something in his words, something in his presence, felt like a balm to her wounded soul. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Then let me help you," Keanu said, his voice gentle but steady, his eyes unwavering. "You gave me a second chance that night when you let me explain. Let me do the same for you." Jessica didn't respond right away. Her mind raced, her heart pulling in different directions. But as they reached the hotel entrance, she stopped and looked at him. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Her voice was soft but held a flicker of hope. Keanu smiled gently, his smile filled with reassurance. "That's all I can ask for." As they parted ways that night, both of them knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something that could heal old wounds, forge new connections, and maybe, just maybe, bring them both peace and love they had been searching for. That night, as Jessica lay in the quiet of her hotel room, her mind raced. Her emotions were raw, her walls beginning to crack. She thought of Keanu's gentle but regretful eyes. Memories of her teenage years came flooding back. The cold nights, the empty streets, and the way his voice had once made her feel safe, if only for a moment. On the other side of the city, Keanu sat in his hotel room, staring at the city lights through the window. He couldn't stop thinking about Jessica, her pain, her strength, and the ways he had let her down. A deep need grew inside him, to make things right. Not for his peace but for hers. The next morning, Jessica woke up to a soft knock on her door. Hesitant, unsure, she opened it to find a small bouquet of wildflowers and a note. "Jessica. No pressure, no expectations, just a breakfast invitation if you're ready. I'd love to continue our conversation. If not, I'll understand. Keanu." Her heart clenched as she read the note. The kindness, the thoughtfulness, it was so different from the pain she had felt before. After a moment of hesitation, she decided to meet him at the hotel cafe. Keanu was already there, sipping a cup of coffee, looking unexpectedly nervous. When he saw her, he immediately stood up, a hopeful smile on his face. "Jessica, thank you for coming," he said softly. She sat down, her expression guarded but open enough to show she was willing to listen. "I don't know why I'm here," she admitted honestly. Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. "You're here because part of you still believes in hope. And because you deserve answers, closure, maybe even a friend." The word friend hung in the air, and Jessica found herself softening. Over pancakes and coffee, she opened up about the years after their first meeting. Her struggles with homelessness, the foster homes that didn't last, and the strength she found in herself to build a life. Keanu listened, his heart breaking with every word but swelling with admiration for the woman she had become. When it was his turn, he shared his own story, the loss of his best friend, how he had thrown himself into work to escape his pain, and how often he had thought of her, but been too paralyzed by his own grief to reach out. By the end of the meal, the tension between them had melted into something softer, something resembling understanding. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you," Jessica said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I want to try. I think I need to try, for myself." Keanu nodded, his eyes glistening. "That's more than I could ever ask for." "Jessica," he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere this time." In the weeks that followed, their lives became intertwined in ways neither of them expected. Keanu introduced Jessica to friends in Los Angeles who helped her chase her dreams, giving her opportunities to grow and heal. Meanwhile, Jessica's resilience reminded Keanu of the importance of connection and vulnerability. One day, as they sat on a quiet park bench overlooking the ocean, Jessica turned to Keanu with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just save my life that night. You saved it again when you chose to care this time." Keanu reached out and took her hand gently. "And you saved mine by giving me the chance to make it right." Their story didn't end with grand gestures or fairy tale romance. It ended with something far more powerful: the rekindling of hope, the healing of old wounds, and the promise of a future built on trust and understanding. At that moment, as the sun set over the horizon, Jessica and Keanu realized they weren't just fixing the broken pieces. They were building something new, something beautiful, and something unbreakable. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. I'll see you in the next video.